Is consciousness a phenomenon of the body? No. This is actually something I've thought a lot about. I'll tell you why I've thought about it. I'll take you back a step. A woman I knew very, very well, and with whom I had spent a great deal of time over the course of many years, developed Alzheimer's and slowly lost faculties and eventually, sadly, passed away. As she lost her mental faculties, she lost, of course, recognition of people. And along the loss of the recognition, there was a loss of relationship. Now, as a scientist, as someone who had studied neurology, I could tell you what was happening in her brain. I mean, we know on some level which aspects of the brain, which parts of the brain are impacted in Alzheimer's. We may not know exactly why it happens, but we can certainly look at it clinically and say, this is Alzheimer's. Okay, here's the dendrites, here's the connections, here's what's happening. So I knew neurologically what was going on. And I had a moment in which I thought, okay, now wait. This is a woman who has been in a loving relationship with her husband for 50 plus years. Does love exist in our dendrites and glial cells? I mean, is that the home of love? Well, of course not. I mean, anybody who's ever experienced love, I don't know, I'm not prepared to accept the fact that the deepest love I've ever felt is just a product of my glial cells and dendrites and, no. It's who I am. Right? It's core. It's deep, it's soul, it's spirit, it's consciousness. It's not glial cells and dendrites. But if neurologically that's all that's happening to her, it's not affecting her soul, it's not affecting her spirit, she's conscious, she's awake, where's the love going? And this bothered me for a really long time. And I spent a lot of time thinking about it. And I asked a lot of leaders, a lot of people I trust, and over a couple of years, here's where I've come to with it. Consciousness does not exist in the body, meaning it's not manufactured by the body. It's not dependent on the body for its existence. And yet, our experience of consciousness is dependent upon the body. Here's a way to think about it. Michael exists. Okay, we all can agree he exists. I have 5 ways of knowing he exists. I can see him, I can hear him, I can smell him, I can feel him, I can taste him. Those are my 5 ways of interacting with my world. If I want it to really be my truth, if I don't want to just take your word for the fact that Michael exists. So if I close my eyes and Michael stays quiet, I'm not close enough to touch or taste him. He doesn't smell, so I have no smell. As far as my world is convinced, Michael no longer exists. Hasn't changed the fact that he exists. But I'm no longer able to interact with Michael. My experience of Michael has ceased to exist. It is dependent upon those 5 senses, or at least one of them. I need at least one of them in order to have any interaction with him on a level of existence. consciousness exists. We are able to interact with consciousness through the physical structure of our brain. And one of the ways we know this neurologically is when different things happen in our brain, whether it's an injury, whether it's something like a stroke, whether it's a brain trauma, whether it's drugs you've taken, whether it's somebody stimulating a part of your brain, which actually they can do because the brain doesn't have any pain sensors. So should somebody ever have to go in for surgery that requires the scalp to be opened, they actually can go in with metal probes while you're wide awake and conscious because the brain doesn't experience pain. So from all of that, what we know is that things that have nothing to do with soul, spirit, consciousness, things that have everything to do with getting, banged or a stroke or a car accident or ingestion of certain chemicals changes our experience of consciousness. Talk to someone who's just ingested a lot of LSD about what consciousness is. Now, consciousness hasn't changed just because you've ingested a lot of LSD, but your experience of it has. Now, where has that LSD worked? It's worked on your brain. It's worked on the chemicals and the electrical patterns in your brain. Your experience of consciousness has changed. Get an injury, have a stroke. Different parts of the brain get impacted and damaged. Your experience of consciousness shifts. That of which you are conscious shifts. Consciousness hasn't changed. So when we think about consciousness, when we think about our soul, when we think about love, which was for me what brought the whole question up. The love exists, but her ability to interact with the love was impacted. That love was bigger and deeper and beyond the cells of her brain, but she no longer could interact with it. And so we require the physical structures in our physical brain in order for us to be conscious. Not just conscious in terms of the opposite of unconscious as in a coma, but spiritually conscious. We have no other way of interacting with it. If I go to meditate and I'm chanting my mantra, or I'm watching my breath, or I'm doing whatever my meditative practice is, well, it's my brain that's chanting my mantra. I mean, I know that sounds very superficial and material, but the truth is it is. That repetition, the memory of what the mantra is, the ability to enunciate the words, these are all properties of my very physical brain. The ability to watch my breath, physical brain. That which that which actually makes me breathe, the involuntary even action of breathing, brain, brainstem. So it's all, and as I go deeper and deeper into my meditation, the experience I'm having, as shallow and superficial as it sounds, is actually taking place in my brain. Now, from my brain, a whole cascade of reactions are taking place in my body. I feel it in my heart. But we know from brain scans, for example, one of the things that happens when you meditate is you lose the sense of where you end and the world begins. You lose a sense of the body in space. There's a sense of just oneness. Well, we now know with brain scans what part of the brain this is happening in. Where are the proprioception areas of the brain that end up becoming much quieter and not nearly as active when I'm having a meditative experience of union? Now, of course, that experience is of consciousness. The experience is of the soul. The experience is spirit. The experience is coming back to the source of who you are. But it's happening via your brain. The brain is the medium. Like Michael is happening for me via my 5 senses, or at least one of them. My experience of consciousness is happening via my brain. So it doesn't live there any more than Michael lives on my retina, or in my ears, or in my hand that's touching him. But he's able to be experienced by me through those. In the same way that consciousness is able to be experienced by me through my brain.